And welcome everybody to Transition in Leadership here in Spencer. My name is Randy Cauthron. I'm the managing editor of the Spencer Daily Reporter. And as the new year is at hand, we will be transitioning from one mayor to another here in Spencer. And current mayor, Kevin Robinson, joining me here for the first part of today's show. So thank you very much, Kevin, for agreeing to sit in and visit a little bit.
My pleasure, Randy.
Talk about it. First of all, talk to me a little bit about what prompted you to initially run. You had not really had a career in politics. It was not anything you'd really ever tried before. What prompted you to run for mayor of Spencer initially?
Well, I suppose it'd be a couple things. Politics has always interested me. I have a teaching degree with a social studies endorsement, so the study of psychology, people, sociology, politics. I just enjoy that theater. And I was involved in Leadership Iowa, which is put on once a year through the Association of Business and Industry in Iowa. There's 40 participants across the state, and one of the big charges in that course, it's a 9-month course, and they really encourage people to get involved as an elected official at any level. And so that, combined with my experience as a Eagle Scout and a Scout executive, is which brought me out here in the first place to Clay County and Spencer. When you combine all that together, I felt that I had a window in my life where I could dedicate some personal time towards the service of a community, and this is the community that I was living in, and so decided to run for office. I was very clear when I ran that I didn't run against anything. There wasn't any particular issue that I wanted to oppose or be different than the current leadership. It was really more just an opportunity that if the voters were willing, I would be in a position to serve and lead to the best of my ability.
How did that impact your personal, professional life at that time?
At that time, so 4 years seems like a long time and a short time, it depends how you look at it, but at that time I still had ownership of my document shredding company that I co-owned with Josh Nelson. We ended up selling that company to Stericycle, and then during that transition time, a local business here, Spencer Auto Parts, came up for sale, and we reinvested the funds from our document shredding business into the parts store. So I guess you could say I had two transitions happening almost simultaneously there. And the demand for time, because of my position in the parts store and the great staff that we have there, I did have flexibility during the day to be involved in city meetings when needed. And then of course, staff as well as elected officials put a lot of time in. It's not uncommon between your everyday job and then your political job. If you're an elected official at the local level, you might start your day at 6:30, 7 o'clock, and you might not be done with your day till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, depending on what types of meetings are arranged or lined up. But that was the impact that it had. And again, like I said, I had a time window where my daughter was in high school. When you're in high school, you're busy. She wasn't home a lot. My son, who's 6 years younger than her, was young enough that he wasn't involved in a whole lot of activities, and so now the time windows have changed. She's off to college, and my son now is 12, and so there's a little window I'd like to capture before he gets into high school and spend the time that I was spending on politics to spend more with the family.
So there wasn't really anything locally that drove that. It was more of a personal decision to step away from the role?
I get asked that question a lot, oh, I bet you're counting down the days, or I bet you can't wait till you transition out, and that's really not the case. My decision was not based at all on any incident or not liking what I was doing, or a distaste for team members or anything like that. I truly enjoy serving, enjoy the role of mayor, but we all have to look at how our life is setting up in the present day, as well as forecasting out the next couple of years. And I just felt that the things that were on my personal plate coming up in the next couple years were going to demand more time than what I had time available in the previous 4. And my philosophy is, if I'm not going to be able to be 100% present, then somebody else needs to step into those shoes.
So coming into it with no real background in it, what was the learning curve like?
The learning curve wasn't, I wouldn't say substantial, from the standpoint, as I said before, I have followed politics. The federal level, state level, and local level, they all have their different nuances, but I've had involvement with local government. So I was on the Civil Service Commission for about 15, 16 years. I've spoken previously at city council meetings on different economic development topics. So there were some inner workings, certainly, that you have to catch up on. But as far as people dynamics, leadership dynamics, a lot of the different philosophies and different approaches to how to lead and interact with people, it's the same in business, it's the same in politics, it's the same in your family. So you just cross those over into the knowledge base of city politics and just move forward from there.
When you came on board, what were some of the challenges that the city was facing at the time, if any?
Good question. When I came on board, the Riverfront Plan was recently published, probably 90 days or so prior to taking office on January 1st. And so there was a lot of decisions that we walked through about how to handle that. That's a big dollar project and a big concept. We were also in the process, the previous council had made the purchase and land acquisition for the building we currently sit in. So we went through the process of handling that transition. So I was not part of the decision to make the purchase, but was part of the decision to handle the transition into the new building. And then we tried to tackle some really big topics like commercial air service. We were very close. COVID hit, and probably ended up being a good thing because the company that we were looking at that had the Essential Air Service contract with Mason City and Fort Dodge that we were going to hook up with in this last go around did not get that renewed. And it's a larger jet service now that goes in and out of Mason City and Fort Dodge, and so that probably would have went away anyway. But then you always have to deal with, so the question was when I came in, those are probably the big topics that were occurring when we came in. And then of course the transition of a new city manager. So Amanda started, she was on an interim contract like late November, early December through when she started full-time January 8th or 10th, something like that. So my first council meeting, Amanda actually was not the city manager. And so then there was the onboarding process of a new mayor and a new city manager at the same time. So this was the largest city that she had led. And then obviously I was the first time politician, first time mayor. So both feeling our way through that and guiding through some of those decision-making processes. And there were things that she wanted to accomplish and things that I wanted to accomplish, and sometimes they were the same thing, sometimes they were different things, and so her and I would work through that along with the council.
So, Mr. Mayor, as you prepare to transition out, is there anything left on the table that you're disappointed you weren't able to get to?
Well, I always said that if we weren't going to accomplish something, it wasn't because we were afraid to either talk about it or try it. So I can leave feeling comfortable that we've had big discussions and that we've tried to approach big solutions to problems. Probably the biggest regret that I would have that didn't come to fruition is in the sector of ag tech. So I believe that in my last campaign, one of the 3 points I ran on was that part of our future of economic sustainability and diversity has to be focused on agricultural tech startup companies. We have the natural resources around us and the infrastructure around us to be able to support organizations and growing companies like that. So we had started to network in with the incubators and the startup community in the state of Iowa. There's a handful of very prestigious ag startup accelerators. Brian Delzell at the Corridor was working on that, and then Kylie Miller and I were actually registered to go to a global ag tech startup conference in San Francisco, and it hit literally at the same time everything got shut down with COVID. In 2020 is when we were going to go out to that. Kylie had done a good job contacting a handful of different companies. There were a couple who were interested in learning more about our territory and our area. I think the resources we have, the people we have, and the trajectory and interest that was building towards that, I think would have paid dividends, and it just went cold because of COVID. And we didn't make the trip, they didn't have the conference, and now obviously Amanda has left, Kylie has left, I'm leaving, those relationships are all changing, and so if there's anything left undone that I think could have had inertia and sustained itself, it would have been some traction in the ag tech startup sector.
Very good. Mr. Mayor, thank you on a great 4 years of service to this community. I think, as a matter of fact, at the city council meeting this week, George Moriarty, the councilman who's also leaving his position on the board, made the comment that you were probably the best mayor that he had seen in his time here. George has been here a long time, so he's seen a few mayors. So it's fair to say that's about as high a compliment as you can get from one of the people who sat up here and served with you.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, it's you can't be successful unless all the spokes in the wheel are strong. And this position as mayor it's just literally it's just another spoke in the wheel. Now the responsibilities are different than some of the other spokes, but you know, we can't be successful in our position if we don't have other successful people around us. And while I appreciate the accolades, you know, they're really more of a testament to the type of community that we have and the team, the full-time paid staff that we have and the elected officials. In fact, a couple press conferences ago, I was very specific about, if you look at the nameplates that are up here, you know, we don't have party affiliations behind our name at the local level. And I think that that's important because there aren't state and federal political planks. If you're a political junkie, you know what a plank is. There aren't those biases that approach into conversations when we talk about how to problem solve. And I think it's important that remains that way. And that's one of the beautiful things about local politics is we truly look at just how do we move the community forward, which is all people, it's everybody. And like I said before, you know, the mayor can't be successful unless everybody else is successful. And so I appreciate the accolades, but again, really more of a reflection on everybody else that's part of the team. So I've appreciated my time. Appreciate the media coverage. You guys do a great job. I've always said when we have meetings, if you have followed our meetings, at least while I've been mayor anyway, I'm a very serious person, but I also like to keep it loose. And so, you know, we joke, we laugh, we stretch some things, you know, but we've never had to worry, I don't believe, about a gotcha media culture where, you know, if we're saying something in jest or, you know, just keeping the mood light, that's going to get quoted and grabbed and then, you know, twisted. And we just don't have that here. And so the newspaper and the radio and everyone involved in media has been just tremendously gracious, I think, in covering city politics. And so I appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Well, you may have noticed the nameplate has changed as we are joined now by, we'll call it Mayor-elect for another week and a half or so.
Right.
Steve Bomgaars. And first of all, congratulations on winning the election. Take a few minutes to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as a native-born Spencer.
Well, I'm a hometown guy. As you said, I was actually born in Sioux City, but we moved here when my family did when I was 4 years old in 1957, a long time ago, and went to school here, graduate of Spencer High School, and met my wife in high school. Marty's a Spencer grad as well, and we went away to college, got married. We lived in the Chicago area for probably about 7 years, something like that, and I started my teaching career out in the Chicago area. And our oldest daughter, Kara, was born out there, and we made the decision that we wanted to raise a family in a smaller community. Spencer wasn't necessarily where we were coming back, and so we were looking for positions, teaching positions, and Marty is an occupational therapist, and looking for those kinds of opportunities as well. And we looked at some other communities, and it was really just by happenstance that we came back to Spencer. There was a late retirement, Barb Avery, who most Spencer people remember as one of the staunchest Republican leaders in Clay County and known throughout the state, retired from her teaching position, and I interviewed for that in the summer of 1980 and was fortunate enough to get the job. And so I taught at the high school, taught history and government for many years, decades actually. And was involved in politics at the local level and ran for city council in 2004 to fill Reynold Peterson's term. Reynold had run for mayor, had 2 years left on his term, and so I ran for that and was fortunate enough to win that seat, and then I was on the council until 2019, so I actually served with Mayor Robinson the first couple of years that he was on as mayor. But we moved to the south end of town after we retired, and we had always thought that we would move closer to our daughters. So I guess we moved about 2.5 miles closer.
A little bit closer.
Yeah. So anyways, so having moved out of 3rd Ward, I had to resign my seat. So that's kind of brings you up to where I am right now.
So when you initially decided to run for council to fill the position vacated by Reynold Peterson,
Yeah.
what prompted you to do that? I mean, I know you've been involved locally in politics, you know, like as a county chairman for the Democratic Party, and I don't know, was there anything else in there besides that? Because like I said, I know that's where I know you from
Yeah.
predominantly. Was there anything else you had done? But otherwise, was this kind of really your first step into an elected role?
Yeah, it was certainly my first step into an elected position, to be sure. I was on the golf board for a few years, so I was somewhat familiar with local government, and having an interest in that area, having taught government for all those years, I have obviously an interest in the national and state and local levels of government. And I thought, well, at that point in 2004, our oldest daughter had graduated from college and was out on her own, and our youngest daughter was just about ready to graduate from the University of Northern Iowa. So I thought this was a great opportunity for me to give back to the community that I'd lived in most of my life and had given our family so much.
Well, with your success as a high school golf coach, I guess we're lucky you wound up here and not as a golf pro, either at the country club or somewhere else. So, you know, good choice, I think, for the people of Spencer. So how did you decide to run for mayor? How did that come about after being out of it for a couple of years?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, because as I previously mentioned, Marty and I had both retired a couple of years ago, and certainly running for public office was not exactly on the radar. And it actually came as a bit of a surprise that Kevin was not going to run for another term. And I've told everybody this, if Kevin had chosen to run for another term, I would have been his staunchest backer to run again. I think he's done a fantastic job. But when Kevin announced that he wasn't going to run, there were a lot of people that reached out to me within the community and suggested that I give it some consideration. So, you know, I told them, because it wasn't just one or two people, there were a lot of people that had reached out. So Marty and I had a lot of conversations about whether or not this is something that we should take on, because it is a decision that affects your entire family, and not just her, but also our children and our grandchildren and things like that. So we had a lot of good, meaningful conversations with regard to how running for mayor and doing the job as mayor can fit into the goals that we have for retirement, and could we still do those, and if so, how that could be accomplished. So I always have had, even since I've been off the council, quite an interest in city government, you know, and there is a certain zeal that I have for city government, and I think that's where really things can get accomplished.
So looking back on your time in the council originally, as you're getting ready to transition now as mayor, has any of the things that happened then built to a fruition that you're going to see now in a different role?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think a lot of building blocks were put in place over the years that I was on the council. A lot of internal kinds of things within the city staff, as far as things outside that the citizens would notice. For probably the last half of the time that I was on, we were consumed with the sewer separation project and had a huge impact on the city. Infrastructure always has a huge impact on the city, the citizens, and so forth. I'm looking forward to not having to deal with that quite as much, actually, but there will be other challenges, I'm sure, down the road that will maybe not be to that magnitude, but certainly big things coming forward.
Okay. What do you think your skill sets are that you bring to this job that will help you be successful in this role?
That's a good question too. I think that number one would be the knowledge that I have gained throughout my career with regard to government and politics. And then I think right on top of that, and probably even a bigger thing, is the experience, 15 years experience that I have had on the city council. And I think the relationships that I was able to form with city staff, city employees, I know most of those people. I think that those kinds of relationships have been built and we'll be able to further those. So I think those are the two things, my career-based and then the experience that I have, that I've had on the city council.
Awesome. All right, thank you much. We're getting we're getting close to that day.
We are.
So it'll be shortly after the first of the year. So
Yeah.
we'll be anxious to see what happens.
Thanks, Randy.
So joined now by both Steve Bomgaars and Kevin Robinson as we get ready for the big transition coming up here after the first of the year. And talk to me a little bit about, because in a larger scale of things politically, you guys are probably not necessarily aligned. I guess it's fair to say, you kind of touched on it, that we don't put R's and D's behind our thing. When it came for a suitable replacement for Kevin and everything he had done here, I know you guys kind of talked. How did that go? Did Kevin approach you? Did you approach Kevin? How did that play out?
I can take that. So I had set some personal benchmarks. I had let some key members of the team know that, and let me back up. I've said this before. So I approached, basically since probably like 2006, every 2 years the same way. So do I want to serve, not serve? What are my family dynamics, professional dynamics, so on and so forth. And then when I got into office, I was very clear, especially with Amanda, because as a city manager, whenever you have elected officials transition, that significantly impacts your job, especially as mayor, because the mayor-manager relationship is different than the council relationship, just because of the types of topics that you end up discussing. And so I had let her know a date that I would decide whether I would run or not. And so I served 2 terms, right? So I went through the same process the first time as I did the second time. And when I hit the date that I knew I was not going to run, which was 30 days before I was going to announce that I was not going to run, there was 2 people that I had contacted to see if they were interested to serve, that I thought had the knowledge to serve, the skill set, the acumen, and the desire to serve, and Steve was one of those people. And so I probably contacted Steve, I would guess 4 or 5 times, and we were both basically hedging percentages. So I would call him and say, hey, I'm X% pretty sure I'm not gonna run again, are you interested? And he'd say, well, I'm X% sure, I don't know that I really wanna run, or I am gonna run, and then, the closer those windows come together, right? Then the closer the answers become about, well, are you, or are you, or are you, So that's, from my perspective, that's really how the transition went. And I announced in July, about the second week in July. And so, Steve and my conversations really started probably, mid-spring, late spring, just kind of some feelers every now and again, follow up in a couple weeks. And I would say, the relationship that we have is somewhat unique because when Steve transitioned out of the council, I had the relationship with him as being a fellow elected official, but then even as a peer, when there's topics that come up, you're always bouncing, my style anyway, I'm always contacting people who I think maybe think like I do, and I for sure contact people who probably think a little differently than I do, just to get perspective of, am I seeing this clearly? And the relationship that Steve and I built over the time he was on the council, then I would call him periodically as an advisor when he was off the council, you know, because now he had the added perspective of the public, right? So he knew the inside ball game, but then he also knew the public perception as well. And then I think that those conversations just transitioned into, you know, hey, if you have a desire to be mayor, I think you'd be a great mayor.
Now, you said there were two people.
Mhm.
I will give the comfort to the city of Spencer. I was not number two, so everybody can rest assured that I was not on the list. Steve, when he first came to you and broached that topic with you, did you really have to do a deep dive on that to decide whether or not, especially being retired and you and Marty having a lot of freedom in that role? Because I know Marty also serves in a variety of capacities with the community, so both of you have a service-based lifestyle. Was it hard for you to come to that decision?
Yeah, I think it was hard. I think that there are probably a lot of people who suspect that it was just an easy decision, that I had been involved before, that my interests lay in government and service to the community and that sort of things, and maybe they thought it was an easy decision, but it certainly wasn't. Kevin talked a little bit about the percentages, 90, 10, 50, 50, whatever. And I would say when he first broached the subject that, I don't know, even know if it was 10 at that time. So it really wasn't, as I said before, it wasn't on the radar at all. So yeah, it was a tough decision to make. Even after I took papers out in early August, I was not at 100%, to be sure. At that point, Kevin was. I'm pretty sure you were 100%, weren't you? And but I wasn't. And it wasn't until really the last weekend in August, and I'd given myself a date that I had to make a decision by, because I thought it was not only trying to be fair to myself and my family, but also fair to others who might be contemplating running as well, because the filing date, I think, was September 15th. And it was on that last Sunday in August that Marty and I we'd had a lot of conversations, but we had a very long, drawn out, heartfelt, put everything on the table kind of conversation to make the decision to run.
I'm assuming she was supportive?
She's very supportive. She's probably, well, without doubt, my strongest supporter, I think. And if I couldn't have her total 100% support, and I'm sure Kevin would feel the same way with Becky, you just can't do it. There's just absolutely no way that you could do it without the 100% backing of your family, and especially your spouse.
So going ahead, Mr. Mayor, Kevin, do you have any advice for Mayor-elect?
I thought you might ask that question, Randy.
Yeah.
I actually have no advice for Steve. Steve doesn't need advice. Steve, what I have told him and our new city manager, Dan Gifford, is that I will be as absent as I need to be, and I will be as resourceful as called upon. And so part of the role of transition is allowing transition to happen. And I think this is again, because it's local politics, everything is a healthy process. And so I might have advice for Steve if he didn't have the background that he has. The only thing I would offer is that while it will be familiar, it will feel a little different because the role is different, right? So previously when he served his job was to really know the people in his ward, to really be their voice, to clearly understand the nuances of the issues that he had to vote on from a policy perspective, and really represent their best interest. As mayor, my approach anyway has really always been, it's that next level up. So my job isn't to understand how the constituents want their vote to be represented. It's really to make sure that we have followed and guided the process of whatever we're going to vote on, so that the public is informed and aware, and B, that the council is informed and aware and comfortable in their vote. It never once mattered to me how people voted. I've said that frequently to the council. I don't care how they vote, but my job as mayor is to make sure that when something hits the agenda for the council meeting, it's been fully vetted, it's been fully discussed, and everybody is comfortable enough to have their vote represented. And so that's really the only difference, I think.
So having both worked beside Mayor Robinson and then had the last couple years to sit back and watch how things have unfolded, what things have you seen in him that you hope you can carry on in this new role?
Well, I think that, well, first let me just back up. I think you're right. I've had the distinction of serving in both of those roles. And I think Kevin has done an outstanding job as mayor, and he knows that. I've told him that before. I'm not just blowing smoke either. I think he's done an outstanding job and been a great leader for the city of Spencer during some very difficult times. And I would say that, and he mentioned this earlier on too, that when he came on board, we had just hired a new city manager. And so there was that dynamic that he had to deal with, not only getting his legs under him with regard to being mayor, but also working with a new city manager. He didn't have an experienced city manager that he could work with. I think they formed a good team during the years that he was mayor. I think that Kevin did an outstanding job representing the city during the COVID crisis. I mean, not that we're out of the COVID crisis, I'm not saying that, but when it hit everything full bore, we had to have a leader at the local level, and I think Kevin did an outstanding job with that. And I think he's done a good job in terms of allowing all voices to participate. And whether that goes from Calvin on the street corner to the free medical march or whatever it was. And I think that he's handled those kinds of situations with grace and diplomacy, I think. And so, I take from that, I give him a lot of credit, but I'm also, taking that in as I step into this seat in the next few weeks.
So what do you both see in the future for Spencer? 5 years down the road, what's going to change? What's going to be built on? What are your hopes anyway? I know obviously we're not, soothsayers here. We're not forecasting, but what would you like to see either done or different or changed here 5 years down the road?
Steve, you've already got the votes. Do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I'll take that. Randy, I didn't campaign on anything that I wanted to see changed in a big way. I think that as a community, we have an outstanding community. I think we have outstanding elected officials on this council. We have an outstanding city staff, without question, and our employees are good. We've got the foundation, the fundamentals that allow us to just take off, and we're ready for anything that comes our way. I'm totally convinced of that. Now, does that mean we just sit back and wait for things? No, we have to be proactive, and I think that the city as a whole, whether it's city government, whether it's the nonprofits, whether it's the business community, has always engaged in being very, very proactive in that way. So in 5 years, I don't know exactly where we're going to be or what we're going to have that's new going on, but I guarantee you we're going to have some positive changes in the community in 5 years. I have no doubt about that.
Very good. Kevin, anything you want to offer on that?
I think the last census results show what our future is. So Spencer is going to continue to be an outlier. So when you look at the growth versus the loss of population in our region and in rural Iowa, we gained population. Most of the towns around us lost population. In fact, there were some county seat towns, in rural Iowa and northwest Iowa that lost population. So what that means is we will continue to foster the responsibility to be, which we have in the past, but it'll be different. So in the past, the significance of Spencer has been strong retail commerce, strong regional presence. It's the bigger town that people from the smaller towns come to. Historically, those small towns had vitality. There was small school districts. They were, fully functioning small towns. And then Spencer was the bigger town. When you look at essential services now, you have to drive farther to get those. And a lot of the small towns, I had my eyes opened up. It's probably 1.5 years or 2 years into office. The gentleman who runs Keep Iowa Beautiful did a presentation down in Sac City at one of our Northwest Iowa League of Cities meetings, and he talked about a phrase that hit me like a 2x4 across the forehead. I had to digest it. He said, some of these small towns have to plan almost like you're on hospice. You're dwindling. How do you want to dwindle? And some are surviving well, some have adapted, and some continue to decline. And he gave some very specific examples. And one thing that we really don't have here that you see in other micro-metropolitan areas in the state is a halo effect of jobs that people can commute into and out of. So when you look at like the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids corridor, some of the fastest growing towns are small towns under 3,000 people. But it's a different model. It's not a fully sustainable, holistic model
More
of
of
a
a
small
bedroom
town.
community opportunity.
It's almost bedroom community plus, right?
Yeah.
So, you're seeing school districts pop up like North Liberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're a 4A school. They didn't exist 5, 6, 7 years ago,
Right.
So we do not have that major, I'd call it a major micropolitan presence in Northwest Iowa. It's really Spencer and the Lakes area. If you combine those two populations, you're talking 35,000 people or so. But what our burden needs to continue to be that I think is historically different from a growth scale is our need for diversified housing. So we've had housing projects, but typically our projects mirror the pace that we've grown at over the last 15 years or so. I think you'll see an accelerated need in the next 15 years that's going to be a different kind of curve than the last 15 years. And I've really had to wrap my head around that. It's not something when I first came into office I really even ever thought about. We thought about what people like to hear, like jobs and new businesses. And the reality is the housing study that just got finished about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years now, calls for 180 new homes in the next 5 to 8 years. Now think about that. That's pretty significant. If you have 2.1 or 2.2 people per, and all of a sudden you start to compound that, our commuter workforce, about half of the workforce commutes into town every day, between 3,800 and 4,500 people. And so as the small towns continue to struggle, we have to balance our role in growing but not dramatically negatively impacting them. And it's a difficult conversation to have, and it's a difficult approach to have from a comfort standpoint. But the reality is, I think if you fast forward to 2035, this town will be bigger, and it'll be bigger because of the strategy that gets deployed, as well as the economic factors that continue to happen around us.
Okay, if I can piggyback on that just a little bit. Number one, when Kevin was talking about population growth, yeah, we saw just a little tiny bit of growth over the last 10 years, and Kevin's exactly right. There were among towns between 10 and 25,000 or 10 and 30,000, whatever it was. We were one of the very, very few that had any kind of growth at all. And I read in the paper today that the United States as a whole, within the last year, had one of the lowest population growths since 1937. Since 1937, the United States population as a whole has increased at least 1 million persons per year during those years. Last year, 372,000.
Wow, it's a big drop.
I mean, that's a huge drop as a nation. I mean, it's like 0.1% or something like that. And so we're facing that issue of population growth in a community like this. But our country is facing that as well. So this is not only a local problem or concern, but it's a state concern. It's also a national concern. And I think to Kevin's point with regard to housing, he's right. You know, we tend to focus on jobs and economic development. Well, you have to have places for those folks to live. And then you look at the housing issue. And housing is a multifaceted issue. Yeah, I mean, whether you're looking at single family, you're looking at multifamily, new housing construction, rehabbing older homes, building multifamily dwellings, and then you get into all of the zoning, and then you have to have the area within your community. I mean, that's, you know, one of the sticking points is where can you grow?
Where does the growth come from? Yeah.
Where can you grow? And so all of these are moving parts, and it's a big jigsaw puzzle. But it's one of the things that I find intriguing about city government is that it's not just the city government that's going to provide the solution for these things. And I think Kevin would agree that it's the business community, it's the nonprofits, it's everybody together, and that's what's really great about Spencer is the working relationship that all of those pieces have with one another.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, I think there's one last thing to do here as we get ready to make our big transition. So I'm going to ask Kevin if he would put that up there in between you guys on the shelf. And we are going to allow Kevin to give one last rap.
One last rap?
As he closes out his 4 years of service to this community. So please go ahead.
All right.
And let it happen.
I declare the interview over.
Not quite yet, because now you're going to pass that to Mr. Bomgaars, and he is going to wrap it to begin
There you go.
a new chapter here in Spencer, Iowa.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson.
Very good. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to watch this transition of leadership here in Spencer. I'm Randy Cauthron, and we'll have more for you in future editions of this show.